Okay, fab. We've still got a few more people joining, but we're going to make a start. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is David Opie. I'm the Director of Marketing and Strategy at Practical Vision, which includes businesses like Lawyer Checker and Solve Legal Marketing and our popular Today's publications. I'm joined this morning by Jen Williams, our IT Director, who is going to explain a little bit today about the questions that law firms are asking about one of our products, which is OnDMARC. The objective of today is to really kind of go through what it is, how it works, and why organizations should be looking at adopting it in their business. Hopefully everybody can hear us. We will take questions today if people have got them. There is a chat function on the software that we use. If we don't get round to answering all of the questions that we get, our apologies. We will circulate a sort of a frequently asked questions at the end of this, so that everybody can benefit from the questions that are being asked. The format of today is sort of reasonably laid back. Jen is our resident expert on OnDMARC and all of our cyber-related products and services, and she'll be I'll be posing questions around the questions that we get asked by law firms, and hopefully Jen is going to be able to give us a little bit of insight into this. So, without further ado, Jen, welcome.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on the webinar, and thanks everyone for joining.
We're very excited to have you along.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
First question, OnDMARC is ever such an odd name for something. Perhaps you might be able to give us a little bit of information about what OnDMARC is for the benefit of people, and maybe talk about it in layman's terms as well, because I think it can get quite techy if we're not too careful.
Okay, so in a simple way as I can, in a nutshell, OnDMARC stops a cyber criminal from being able to send an email from your email address. So it's really common that you'll see phishing emails that have a slight difference in the domain name. So for example, they might send an email to one of your clients from David Opie at Lawyer Checker, for example, with a Y, and you might not spot that. And that actually takes the criminal quite a lot of time to set up. It's quite a technical attack. However, it's much more straightforward for a criminal to actually send an email to one of your clients from your exact email address, without that ever passing through your infrastructure. And I think that's something that law firms often find quite surprising as to how easy it is to do that and to actually impersonate your exact domain rather than a similar one. And OnDMARC will stop a criminal from being able to do that.
Sorry, so just rewind a touch. It's actually possible for a criminal to clone the domain of your email address, the exact name of your email address.
It's possible not only for a criminal. There's actually a 3-minute YouTube video on how to do this. So you don't have to be a kind of cyber whiz to be able to do that. We've actually demoed this problem to lots of law firms, and we actually use one of our apprentice IT technicians to orchestrate this attack. So it's not a high-tech, sophisticated way of doing something. It's actually really straightforward.
And what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? We've got some statistics on the screen. 1,400 organised criminal gangs are trying to steal money from the legal sector at any one time. That's a stat that came out of government. We think that around £10 million a year is lost to email modification fraud. Mm-hmm. And certainly the latest SRA risk report, the 1920 version, identifies that a lot of client funds are still going missing. Yeah. And I think later on we're going to talk a little bit about a few case studies where actually this has been perpetrated.
So I think even outside the legal sector, it's really important now to note that cyber criminals are starting to focus more and more on what they perceive to be their low-hanging fruit. So law firms and sometimes SMEs who maybe don't have a lot of these kind of basic protections in place, they're low-hanging fruit for the cyber criminals who at the end of the day are running their own business. They've got to be efficient, so they'll go for easy targets.
So talk us through the sort of the process here that the criminal goes through. We talk about property transactions because that's where a lot of this happens, because of the funds that are on offer, you know, and the attractiveness of the amount of money that's available to criminals. Talk us through the process. How do they infiltrate the transaction, and then what sort of happens thereafter?
Okay, so I think a lot of people get really excited when they're about to move house. So I know some of my friends certainly will post on social media that they're about to move house. They might make recommendations about the conveyancer that they're using. So I already know that this person is a client of this conveyancer. I'm sure most conveyancers have a section on their website about our people, so that meet the team. If not, it's quite easy to find on LinkedIn. So I already know the names of and can guess the email format of some of the conveyancing staff there. I can then use this technique as a criminal to send that client an email from their seemingly legitimate conveyancer to say, either actually we've changed our bank details, can you send the funds here, or can you give me details of the transaction? Not only can I elicit funds directly, I might be able to actually get some more information about the transaction that allows me to appear much more genuine later on in the process.
And this doesn't just happen to people that are emailing out from law firms, it actually happens to organisations that are emailing into law firms as well.
Yeah, so lots of law firms will deploy things like inbound filtering and mimecast, which could catch some of the spoofed emails from other organisations that are emailing in. What OnDMARC does is it protects the actual brand of your firm, so your firm's email address cannot be copied. So I always try and think about this as it's protecting the sender's brand rather than the recipient's.
And we don't just see that this happens in conveyancing, we see that it happens across the businesses, across the business, really anywhere where there are funds that are being transferred from within the law firm to an external party.
Yeah, and it's not just about funds. So this could happen. So although conveyancing is a great target for cyber criminals, this could happen to any organisation that's transmitting valuable data outside of their organisation.
Oh, okay. So an OnDMARC isn't specifically for the legal sector?
No, this is so DMARC is actually recommended by the National Cybersecurity Centre for all UK businesses. So if you have, it's a great resource, the National Cybersecurity Centre's website. It's independent, and they recommend that all UK businesses implement DMARC on their domain.
We're obviously focused on the legal sector as an organisation, and we've done our own research into the sector, alongside looking at research that other membership bodies and the regulators have done. So we know, for example, that 72% of all cybercrime actually starts with email modification fraud. And
I think there's going to be some more statistics published this year that show that it's actually increasing. As cyber defences become more sophisticated, criminals are relying more and more on these low-tech type of attacks. So I would not be surprised at all if that statistic actually jumps up this year.
Well, we've done our own research as well, and we've found that the vast majority of law firms we speak to don't have this implemented. Now, there is some stuff that law firms have already done that is doing something to protect their domains, isn't there? Which is around SPF and DKIM.
Yeah, so most law firms who've got either a good in-house IT team or a good outsourced provider will have implemented some form of SPF and DKIM on their domain to protect their emails to a certain extent.
But OnDMARC's different. OnDMARC goes a step further, or
yeah, OnDMARC
because we often get talked to and challenged actually by law firms that say to us, well, look, we've done this. We've got some something like this in place. What is it that DMARC does that is different from what the existing infrastructure is for law firms?
So DMARC actually manages to find that balance between legitimate emails being delivered and making sure that only legitimate emails are delivered. So quite often we'll see IT providers that have done some configuration on the DNS security that means that actually lots of legitimate emails can't be delivered, and the law firm would never know because there's no kind of inbuilt reporting. OnDMARC actually will let you know the progress and the status of it, so you'll be able to tell which emails were legitimate, you'll be able to tell how many illegitimate emails were blocked. Now, what DMARC also does is it actually contains within it a message for the recipient's email address as to what they should do with that email. So actually it means that emails that are suspicious or haven't come from the law firm's domain can actually be rejected before they've even reached the recipient.
And actually, what we are sort of saying as an organisation to the law firms and other organisations that we work with is you kind of have to be suspicious of email.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm sure lots of the firms on this webinar, by the fact that you've attended this webinar, will have an interest in cybersecurity, and I don't doubt that you're already training your staff to keep an eye out for suspicious emails. However, what you can't do is train your clients and train other organisations who may be expecting to receive emails from your domain, and that's what the criminals rely on, the fact that you actually have no influence over how careful your clients are or how careful you're doing the other organisations that you're dealing with. So I know in my role as the IT director here, I will really struggle for us to onboard a supplier who doesn't have DMARC on their domain, because I don't know who I'm talking to. I could be talking to a cyber criminal.
So we've taken the step to actually only work with, or aim to only work with, organisations that have got this level of cybersecurity in place.
Yeah,
that's the sort of seriousness with which we've taken this approach.
Exactly.
I know we internally kind of talk about two main things that really make our organisation more cyber aware, and that's a technical competence and a what you might sort of call a social competence, or an understanding sort of amongst the team that that we need to be much more cyber savvy. DMARC would be an example of a technical competence.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's no, I think in the world of cybersecurity, we're quite often asked, well, what should I do? How do I make myself safe? And I think the answer is there's no silver bullet. What you have to do is address each problem in turn. So OnDMARC solves the problem of criminals being able to spoof your domain. On top of that, there are still other measures that you need to take. So you do still need to have staff training and staff awareness within your organisation to protect you from inbound threats. This is protecting your client from something that could be sent from your domain.
The question that you're always going to get from law firms is, how much does it cost? What do I need to be budgeting for this? I think cybersecurity is quite a kind of a scary, almost prospect for a lot of organisations, especially when you consider what's at stake for law firms. We've got a couple of case studies that we're going to look at where people have been infiltrated, or money's gone missing, and there is both a financial implication for the law firm and a reputational impact on the law firm. And I think when you're talking cybersecurity, anybody that falls victim to it has kind of got to keep both of those things very, very much at the forefront of their mind, alongside the lost working time that you often see from cybersecurity breaches that are less sort of well publicised, but have a much bigger knock-on effect on the law firm, because of course if they can't work for 24, 48 hours, they're going to come under a lot of pressure. A ransomware attack might be a great example of that, where a virus is launched into the network and the criminal organisation requests payment in order to unlock it.
Yeah.
So I think law firms have got to think about what the opportunity cost of not implementing cybersecurity in their business is going to be. But hopefully you've got a little bit of good news on that. This isn't going to cost them.
No. So as a business, we've deliberately set out to not price anybody out of having robust cybersecurity, because you don't need over-engineered, price-league technical solutions, and that's something that I personally am really passionate about, having been the IT director being sold to. I think it's really important that we focus on practical, simple things that will actually dramatically reduce risk, and it's about finding that balance between budget and results. So a typical 50-person law firm will be charged a £250 setup fee, and that means we will configure we'll configure your domains with all of the services that you use to send emails, to make sure that legitimate emails are still being sent. And then it's an ongoing £75 monthly fee, and that covers the cost of having the portal, so that you can actually monitor the effectiveness of it. And the portal is actually really, really good, because it means that your own IT team can then monitor how your DMARC implementation is, or how your DMARC is performing. And if there are changes that need to be made, the app will actually tell you what changes need to be made on your domain. So it's kind of, you can't really go wrong once you're configured. Without this portal, it's quite a technical thing to maintain, so the cost of maintaining it can be quite high. With the portal, that's significantly better, because again the app tells you exactly what to do.
And we've got a mix of attendees on this webinar when we looked at the registration. So I know we've got some IT managers, we've got a few practice managers, and then we've got a few managing partners. So we've got varying degrees of understanding of sort of exactly what this implementation involves. But to what extent does the law firm have to be involved? To what extent do we as the supplier take up the slack? And what might how might we set expectations for people listening to this around how long it might take to implement, and what that process looks like?
Okay, so first point on the slide, there's a few factors that determine how long it takes. So firstly, if you have an outsourced IT provider or an outsourced web host, we can work directly with them to get you configured. So we'll ask you to do as an introduction. We can work with them to implement this on your domain. How long it takes to implement is dependent on a few things. So if you have a domain where you've got lots of emails being sent, lots of traffic going through it, lots of data that we can analyze, that's typically a quicker setup than if you have a domain that only has a few emails going through it. This product works with any infrastructure, so whether you kind of use MailChimp, Office 365, Google, it works with any infrastructure. The complexity of your infrastructure can mean that it takes a little bit longer. So if you use, let's say, 10 different services to send emails, that takes us a little bit longer than if you use 1 or 2. As a guide, we say most firms can be configured within 6 weeks.
That, from a cybersecurity point of view, doesn't sound like a huge amount of time. What about getting the staff on board with this? What do the staff really need to understand about an OnDMARC implementation?
So the beauty of this is it actually sits in the background. So other than I don't know, if you've got an in-house IT team who are going to be using this going forwards, there's no kind of user onboarding or user adoption because it all happens in the background. So I think this is one of the beauties of this, is that actually you may need 1 or 2 people involved at your firm. Nobody else will see it. They'll just see that your clients are no longer receiving emails from criminals rather than from your firm.
And who manages it ultimately? So does it then fall to the law firm to manage it on an ongoing basis, or does it fall to the supplier?
So we will manage it until the configuration's complete. At that point, we will speak to the law firm and ask them who is going to manage this going forward. So whether it be the IT provider or the in-house IT department, they're usually who manages within a law firm. We'll then provide them with some training and access to the portal so that they can do that.
I think it's as we said sort of in the webinar today, the technical competence that law firms need to implement some cybersecurity is not necessarily that expensive. And we've done previous webinars around accreditations like Cyber Essentials, which is a nationally recognised accreditation from the National Cybersecurity Centre, which just helps to get law firms thinking about their cybersecurity. There's a step up from that. There's the Cyber Essentials Plus, which involves a site visit and checks the actual, checks the infrastructure of the organisation. But again, these aren't particularly expensive accreditations, Jen, are they?
No, they're not at all. No, they're a kind of a few hundred to £1,000 a year. They're not expensive to gain or maintain.
And I think we've got a couple of final case studies to sort of finish with. We've literally going to sort of got another 5 minutes to finish off with. This is the heart in mouth moment, isn't it? The first time buyer's money vanishes into the fraudulent bank account, and this is a scenario where the would-be purchaser has transferred the funds into the incorrect account.
Yeah.
And it's like we said at the start, there's the financial implication for the law firm in this, but then there's also the reputational implication because, unfortunately, organisations do get named and shamed around this.
Yeah, there's also any kind of fines that the ICO decide to dish out as a result of any kind of data that's been passed to a criminal rather than the person it's supposed to be passed to.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in the news this week that Dixon's car firm have had a £500,000 fine levied on them for their data breaches 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, we are seeing that the regulators are starting to take cybersecurity much, much more seriously as well. Here's another example. The bogus email is sent, the money goes missing, and nobody actually finds out about this until it's too late in the day. Once the funds hit the fraudulent account, they are sent into lots of different places, and we've all seen in the news the banks have not to date really taken ownership of that, and even the app's voluntary code that they've signed up to in the last few months has to be read very carefully, because of course the banks will only pay out where they've identified that there's been a genuine criminal activity rather than negligence. Just to finish off with, and I think we've probably got the gist of this in terms of the discussion that we've had today. We, as a lawyer checker, are able to do OnDMARC implementation for law firms. It sits as part of our suite of risk products and tools for law firms. I think most people are certainly aware of our account and entity screen, which is the law firm to law firm verification tool, but may not be aware that over the last couple of years we've really extended our roster of tools, and we now have a number of cybersecurity products that help law firms to mitigate that risk of attack, whether it be funds transfer fraud, whether it be email fraud, and so on. We're also an accredited body to deliver cyber essentials. For those of you that spotted last year, the Conveyancing Quality Scheme and Lexcel now identify cyber essentials as a way in which you can accredit your IT, your information and security policies. And our recommendation is certainly that cyber essentials is something that law firms should be looking into.
I'd like to, sorry with you, David, I'd like to extend an offer to the attendees today that we can actually demonstrate the problem of email spoofing to you. So I'll make some resources available in our team, and if any firm actually wants to see this in action, we can show you how a criminal can spoof your domain. We can actually test whether you're susceptible to this attack. If you're not, we'll happily let you know, and if you are, we'll let you're armed with that information.
So the best way to go about doing that, Jen, is to contact yourself or Tom?
That's exactly right, yeah. So
Jen and Tom's contact details are here on the screen, and we'll circulate these as well as part of our follow-up to this webinar. But if you are unsure about what your current situation is, if you are looking at what your options are, or indeed you want to test your infrastructure and just see whether what you're doing is working, we offer a range of facilities such as phishing tests. So we'll actually send out emails purporting to be from organisations that you work with that are actually sort of test phishing emails and see what the response is. We've got the accreditations that we've talked about, and as we've talked about today, we've got the OnDMARC implementation that we can help you with. I really hope that that has been useful in terms of a bit of an insight into how law firms can help themselves when it comes to the risk of email modification fraud. I'm going to leave these details up for just a few more minutes. As I say, we'll circulate them at the end of the webinar anyway. The webinar is recorded. We're going to pop it onto our YouTube channel. We'll circulate the link to that, and you can then share it with colleagues, those who've not been able to attend today. And yeah, if you've got any questions whatsoever, the contact for Jen and for Tom both on the screen. My thanks to Jen. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you to you for listening in, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you very much.